think of when you hear the word education? You think of school buildings, teachers, classrooms full of students in rows of desks, or maybe that's not what you think of. Maybe you think of students in crisp uniforms pledging allegiance to the flag every morning. Maybe you think of logging on for your online class to complete the new module for the week. And whatever you think of, we all know that there are many different kinds of education available in today's day and age. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today is education, and specifically homeschooling, and whether or not homeschooling can provide an education equal to that of a public or private school. But before we get into that, what is homeschooling? Homeschooling is defined as whenever the primary education is conducted in the student's home by their legal parent or guardian. There are currently 2.3 million homeschoolers in the U.S., and this number has been climbing in recent years. Whenever something gets popular, there are generally certain objections that rise against said popular thing. And one of the main objections against homeschooling is the question of whether or not homeschooling is schooling at all, or if these kids are just sitting at home playing Minecraft all day. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And my argument being that homeschooling can provide an education equal in quality to that of public school, that it can prepare its students for college, and when done properly, can also provide students with adequate socialization. And I think that it does this through flexibility and the availability to have an individualized education plan. So let's talk about educational value for a moment. It can be difficult to adequately compare the academic achievement of homeschoolers and public schoolers because their work isn't always comparable and they aren't always graded on the same scales. But one way that we can evaluate whether or not they are on the same level is through standardized testing like the SAT and ACT. Homeschoolers generally perform better than their institutional peers on the SAT, scoring between the 70th and 90th percentiles. They do significantly better on reading and writing portions and are about average on the mathematics and science portions of the SAT. A 1994 study on critical thinking on the California Critical Thinking Skills Test showed that homeschoolers and public schoolers perform just as well on critical thinking skills, which shows that homeschooling is just as good as providing its students with adequate critical thinking that can be very beneficial later on in their educational career. We take a look at college readiness, which is very important as grades K through 12 are set up mainly to set up these students for college. Most studies have shown little to no statistical difference between institutionally schooled students and homeschooled students, though in a few areas, homeschoolers statistically come out on top. One of these areas is your average GPA in the first year. Homeschoolers found an average GPA in their first year of college of 3.41 versus the institutional schooled students having an average GPA of 3.12 in their first year of college. When taking a look at the emotional readiness for college, homeschoolers showed more openness to new experiences, more conscientiousness in their studies, and less overall anxiety. Homeschoolers were also more likely to take on leadership positions on campus and stayed in those leadership positions longer than their institutional peers. When we look at acceptance and graduation rates, we see similar findings where homeschoolers are accepted to colleges at the exact same rates as their institutional peers. So homeschooling in no way is a detriment to their ability to get into college, and they actually graduate at a rate of 10% more than institutionally schooled students. Homeschoolers graduating at a rate of 67%, and institutional schooled students generally graduate at a rate of about 57%. One of the main questions that pops up, however, is are homeschoolers getting socialized? It's true that during the hours of the day, homeschoolers aren't surrounded by large numbers of their peers. They're generally smaller amounts of children, siblings. And so parents are often concerned about the socialization of their students. However, while homeschoolers do socialize by unconventional methods, studies have shown that they do socialize just as much. So they're not socializing any less. One of the reasons that they turn out just as socialized as public schoolers is because of natural and normative socialization. Children learn through observation. Monkey see, monkey do. And when a child is with their parents and observing socialization frequently, they will learn that natural and normative socialization through observation of their parents. And so homeschooled students have the opportunity to be out in the real world with their parents more often because they aren't at school from 6 to 2 or 8 to 3 or anything like that. Homeschoolers are also more likely to partake in community activities like Little League, 4-H, music and art lessons, singing and theater groups, scouts, and stuff like that to make up for a lack of structured socialization that you would find in school groups. And Generally, homeschoolers have more time to take on these activities because they aren't confined to the strict school schedule. A good majority of homeschoolers also partake in co-ops, which is when families from different homeschools will come together to support each other in the homeschooling education. And this will involve parents teaching groups of children from participating families different skills, classes, subjects, and things like that. This allows homeschooling students to experience what it is like to learn with others in a group environment and also experience different styles of teaching, as each parent will have a different way of teaching their group of students. However, it allows the homeschooled students to experience these things without the constraints of the public school system. So overall, studies have shown that homeschoolers socialize the same amount as their public school students, but with a wider range of ages because they are experiencing different groups of people than just their peers. But why is it that homeschooling is able to provide this quality education, socialization, and college readiness? Well, the reason is most likely due to homeschooling's ability to provide flexibility and individualized education. Society as a whole has been pushing the idea that everybody is different and that we should celebrate individuality. However, we generally don't apply this principle to the educational system. We know that every student learns differently and that there are distinct learning styles, but public schools cannot take advantage of the fact that every student learns differently because of the student-to-teacher ratio. Homeschooling, on the other hand, has a much smaller student-to-teacher ratio and allows the parent to adequately assess each student's learning style and change their style of teaching and curriculum to what best benefits their student. Homeschooling also allows students to work at their own pace and apply time and focus where it is needed. For example, if a student is grasping mathematics really well and they understand all of the basic concepts, they can spend only 30 minutes a day on math. But if they're really struggling with science, they can then spend 2 hours instead of 1 on science and are able to maintain the proper pace without having to take up extra schooling after with tutoring or anything like that. So this allows students to apply the time and focus where they need it rather than being constrained to 40 to 60-minute class blocks. So in conclusion, I think that it is important that we are aware of the fact that homeschooling can provide this education so that parents know their options. When you know your options, you're able to make a more informed decision. Yes, homeschooling isn't for everybody. Maybe their student would do better at a public school, but when they know their options, parents can make an informed decision about what is right for their student and their family. In the end, homeschooling is able to provide an education equal in value to that of a public school. It can set up its students for college and higher education and produces just as well socialized students. All studies done on homeschooling have found that homeschoolers were better educated than on national averages. They were found to vote at higher rates, to have a positive view of their homeschooling experience, and to be generally well-adjusted and productive members of society. Thank you. And then this is my audience. Cool. I did have the camera rolling, just so you know.